I am in Chiapas, Mexico, in the town of San Cristóbal de Las Casas. And behind me is a monument to a remarkable man who lived in the 16th century, Bartolomé de Las Casas, who was a Spanish landlord, Dominican friar, and author. This monument was constructed more than 100 years ago, and it's definitely the worst for wear. But the man that it represents is still important and still worth remembering more than 500 years after he was alive. Here's why. Bartolomé de las Casas was from Spain. He was born there and he died there. But like many Spanish men of the 16th century, he spent much of his career in the Americas. Las Casas began his career as an encomendero on Hispaniola, the island in the Caribbean where the Dominican Republic and Haiti are located now. An encomendero was a landlord. He was given a grant of land, but he wasn't given only the land, he was also given the labor of the indigenous people who lived there. The Spanish coerced labor system in the early modern period in the Americas was brutal, and Las Casas knew firsthand how brutal it could be because he helped suppress an Indian revolt in Hispaniola. Bartolomé de las Casas came to realize that the Spanish coerced labor system was very bad for the indigenous people of the Americas. So he changed career from encomendero to author and advocate for the rights of the Indians of Spanish America. Mainly as a Dominican friar, he spent the rest of his life trying to defend the rights of the Indians of Spanish America. Las Casas' magnum opus was Historia de las Indias, which he spent 34 years writing, from 1527 to 1561. Las Casas served as the Bishop of Chiapas, which in those days was actually part of Guatemala. It's part of Mexico now, but then it was part of Guatemala in the mid-1540s. But he only was here for a couple of years before being forced out of the position because he had a lot of enemies. So even though he was only here for a couple of years, in the 19th century, the town was partly named after him. That's where de las Casas comes from in the name of San Cristóbal de las Casas. Bartolomé de las Casas was successful in, at least in part, in his efforts to advocate for the rights of the indigenous people of Spanish America. His work, though, did have some unintended consequences. One of them was the Black Legend. The Black Legend was something that other European colonial powers in the Americas, especially the British, especially the English, would propagate during the early modern period. And basically what the Black Legend was the idea that the Spanish were uniquely Basically, what the Black Legend was the idea that the Spanish were uniquely cruel, uniquely brutal in their colonization of the America. Las Casas' accounts of the cruelty of the forced labor system in the Caribbean played into this narrative of the Black Legend. The Black Legend was invented by the English to legitimize their colonization of the Americas, but it very much lives on to this day. Another unintended consequence of Las Casas' work was maybe less unintended than the Black Legend, and that has to do with the African slave trade. Las Casas was opposed to the forced labor system of Indians, but he realized that the Spanish colonial system was economically important for Spain. And so he realized that there needed to be a labor source for these plantations in the Caribbean. And he suggested that rather than using Indians, the Spanish should bring in Africans. Bartolomé de las Casas was at once a great advocate for the Indians of Spanish America, as well as a promoter of the African slave trade. So while trying to stop one atrocity, that is the forced labor system that was destroying the Indians of the Caribbean, he helped create, if anything, an even greater atrocity, the transatlantic slave trade, which took more than 10 million Africans to the Americans for permanent slavery. Now, to be fair to Las Casas, he did later retract his suggestion that Africans should be brought in as labor source for the Caribbean. But by then the damage had been done. Other people had taken his idea and run with it. And well, what can I say? The rest is history. The African slave trade was a great atrocity and something that we are still seeing the effects of to this day. Bartolomé de Las Casas was a man of the 16th century, and he wasn't perfect by 21st century standards. But he did, in a way, foresee the universal rights of the Enlightenment of the 18th century and beyond. And in that way, his ideas are recognizable to us today. Bartolomé de Las Casas was an important advocate for the indigenous people of the Americas, and for that reason, he's worth remembering to this day. So that's what I have to tell you about Bartolomé de Las Casas. This is Willie Logan in San Cristóbal de Las Casas, signing off.